In this video, I'll be showing how I access the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS, API using Python in Power BI, and also how to visualize that data that we access through this BLS API with Python visuals in Power BI, ultimately showcasing a tool that I've created that allows me to easily and dynamically select a given series or compare multiple series easily based off the series description rather than the ID itself. So you can use this tool to easily evaluate inflation using the CPI or consumer price index. You can look at more granular levels of CPI, like at the item level or area level or any combination of both. You can even compare CPI easily to PPI, or the producer price index, get an idea of causes of inflation. Is it due to increased costs? Is it due to increased demand? So a couple notes on the API before getting into it. There are a couple versions of this API. It's a version 1 and a version 2. I use version 2. To use version 2, you do have to register, and it's something you have to re-register for annually, but it's pretty easy. If you go to the BLS website, there's clear direction on how to do that. And it's a pretty, to me, typical API to use. It gives you JSON data, so you'll have to structure that into a tabular format in order to use it easily in a tool like Power BI. And then a few quick points about the nature of the BLS data. So you use series IDs to really identify what you want to look at in the data. So here we have the consumer price index, all urban consumers. It's like an aggregate view, high-level view of CPI. So if you want to understand inflation kind of across all U.S. cities on average, across all items on average, you would look at sort of this code here. However, if you wanted to just look at like a specific area of the country, a specific item or group of items, you would change parts of this code appropriately. So like different area code for characters 5 through 8, different item code for characters 10 through 16. You want to look at seasonally adjusted, not seasonally adjusted, so on and so forth. So just wanted to call that out because you'll be seeing series ID a lot throughout the code, throughout this video. So hopefully that helps clarify some things up front. Oh, and if you want to get to that view with the series IDs, you just type in series ID format here in the search, and it'll be really easy to find that. I notice it's just kind of like hard to find it through the drop downs at the top here. So first thing that'll come up, we just type series ID format, brings you to this view, and it has really everything you would want to look at, not just CPI, but PPI, API, etc. Before getting into Power BI, I think I'm going to focus on the Python code first, and then later we'll plug it into Power BI. For the Python part, I really reference this article a lot. I want to give credit. So an article called Exploring Bureau of Labor Statistics Time Series on medium.com, and it was posted by Benjamin Bangford through the District Data Labs. So it's great. Has a lot of great information up front, but also just has a lot of really good Python code used as a template here. I didn't use this like exactly, but I definitely used it as my starting point, and then used a lot of ChatGPT to sort of get to exactly what I wanted to easily. But yep, I'll put this link in the description of the video. Always want to make sure I give credit where credit's due and make sure it's available for your reference as well. So getting into the Python code, for now I just have it in a Jupyter notebook to easily talk through it and show different parts of the code. But again, we'll ultimately be putting this in Power BI. Of course, first step is to import your relevant packages. Some of these are used more than others. Matplotlib is really what's used mainly for the Power BI visuals at the end here. Next step is to get your credentials, of course. Again, you'll have to register for an API key through the BLS website. Pretty sure they email that to you. It does not take very long at all. Of course, I store mine in a CSV and just reference it to get the key rather than put it directly in the code for security reasons. Define your endpoints here, and then really getting into the main meat of the code, which is this BLS fetch function that you define. So kind of roughly what this does is pass in a list of BLS time series, their series ID I mentioned before, to fetch data and return the series in JSON formats is what it comes in by default. So we will be putting that in a data frame later in this code. Arguments can also be provided as quarks. So kind of getting into this if here. So really this is just saying like only pass between 1 and 25 series IDs at a time. That is the limit that the API can handle. Otherwise it'll give you this error. Define your headers, and then payload post data. So payload's going to contain your series IDs and your key, and then update the payload with the keyword arguments or kwargs and convert to JSON. So kwarg piece, defining the payload, JSON dump, and then fetch the response from the BLS API. So defining the response here with the information we've already talked about above, and then parse JSON result. So defining the result, and then some messages after that if it's succeeded. And then getting to the next bit here. So here's where you're actually choosing your series of interests. So for the Jupyter notebook, I actually have just manually plugged in some of the series IDs to just test the functionality of the above. However, in the Power BI, you'll notice that I'm bringing in like really every option I would ever feasibly be interested in of series ID. And then I have that ability to select from a list, and I even have descriptions for each of them. So I show you how I get to that and use that to more easily just toggle between different views of different series. So here for JSON data, I think we're defining the scope of the information we are pulling for each series. So it does go back pretty far. I believe it only goes up through 2023, of course. So I'm just grabbing from 2015 to 2023, just to have more recent data. Don't foresee me needing to understand before 2015 for my purposes. And then next, we actually get into taking that JSON data and putting in that tabular format or that data frame that we need to really make this data in a format that can be easily used by Power BI. Power BI works off really only tabular data in my experience, so got to get it there for that use case. So really, this is just doing that for every series selected above, load the results into a data frame. So it's going to go through that process. But then, at the end, you will have to append the data frames that we're loading into this list here together, because I believe it's pulling a separate one for each series. So you want to get like this one data set for ease of use in Power BI. And then here we have a step to actually load that to a CSV. Again, I just put that there for my QA purposes, just to make sure the data was, sort of coming out the way I would expect. But the Power BI use case, you don't actually need this step, so I do remove that. And then so getting down here, just evaluating the data frame results, making sure it looks how I expect again. So we have a year, period name, latest, value, footnote, series ID. So some of these, fields are more useful than others, mainly the series ID and then the time series pieces so that we can create trends. And then of course the values. And then this step here is really just formatting the data for visualization purposes. So I noticed some of the output I got for time series wasn't the most useful for putting on, let's say, like an x-axis for a visual, for like a trend line. So I just did some reformatting of that. So we'll get too into that. If you want to review that, the code, of course, will be available in my GitHub, which there'll be a link to that in the description of this video. But I'm creating essentially a chart here that has, let's say, the raw values for each series that I'm pulling in, and then I have one that is calculating year over year. So for 2021, it's comparing to 2020, for instance, and so on and so forth. So you kind of get like that growth trend, and that's really how inflation is calculated. It's CPI this year, sort of compared to last year, and just the trend of growth year over year of that, like how much is that consumer price index increasing. All right, so getting back into my BI tool here. Again, the concept for this essentially is like, you saw that Python script I showed before. You saw how there was that step where you manually enter the series IDs to pass to the API with the payload. I was noticing that I would have to go to that series format page and kind of go to each section I was interested in and figure out the specific code for the specific area and item combination that I needed. And there are some other tools that BLS does provide that kind of allow you to more easily grab those codes. But it's still just like taking a while. And I was like, I just wish I had like a drop down and really just a more human readable name for each of these series IDs, and I could just select. And so I was like, I need a BI tool. I need to put this in Power BI. But there's a lot of data processing steps I had to take to get it to that nice view I just described. So going to take you through that, and ultimately we'll get to this front end view I have here. So back at the series ID format page I showed before, you'll notice that when you go to a given section, so back here at Consumer Price Index, all urban consumers, there is links to area codes and item codes for this. So if I click on area codes, for instance, it takes me to this web page with all of this text data. So not super human readable in this view, but you can actually connect to this as a data source in Power BI. And if this ever updates, it'll update the Power BI when you refresh it. So you don't have to worry about the technical debt of like copying and pasting this down into a CSV file every time you want to make sure that the data is most up to date. So the way you do that is you go into the transform query editor or the Power Query editor of Power BI, the back end, right? And there is a data source type, or so you go to new source here and you'll notice web. And literally all you have to do is grab that link I showed before, pop that in there and hit OK. And then it'll bring the data in, and it's already very structured and nice, and so you just hit OK and it brings it in. I've already done this for CPI area codes and item codes, as you can see. I've added some extra steps here, just bringing in, make sure the headers are promoted, making sure data types are good. You'll notice I have this column called merge key that I've added. The reason I've added that is because I am actually merging the area codes with the item codes. I want to get every possible combination of item code and area code so that I don't have to put those together later. So really just taking the Cartesian product, every ordered pair between these two. And so I'm doing that with the merge key. And so here under CPI configurations, I'm doing that merge. So it starts with the area codes, and then I am doing that merge step. And so I'm basing off the merge key. It's literally just a 1 for every record. And that ensures that when I do this merge, every record is being mixed with every other record from item codes to area codes, giving me that true Cartesian product. And it's important to specify full outer join all rows from both here. So you may be wondering, okay, you have the item codes, you have the area codes, but what about your base code? Like these are just, as showed earlier in the video, sort of like in parts of a given series ID. There's going to be a base for CPI that you have to add these pieces onto to get the full series ID to pass to the API and the payload. So that's something that I actually sort of manually grabbed. I have this CSV that I created, and really like I just looked at the page I showed before, right? My series ID format page, and I just like grabbed the code for like overall consumer price index, all consumers, and I actually went through and did that for every single one of these that I was interested in, and put the description there myself, and then I specified if it was seasonally adjusted or not. There is more likely than not a better way to do that. Maybe use a HAR file or like Beautiful Soup web scraping to create a process that has less technical debt. But I guess in my mind, I was like, I'm gonna have to do this once. I don't imagine the base codes ever changing. Now, will they add more item codes, more area codes over time? Most likely, yes. So that process I did make sure was more automated, right? Had a link to the source and less technical debt. But I will do the solid of providing this series data CSV file in my GitHub as well. That way you don't have to go through the same painstaking like manual process that I went through to create this. And that's really it for this step. You'll notice I have PPI, producer price index, API average price index in here as well. Really just went through the same exact steps that I just did for CPI with those, so I don't feel like I need to really go through those as well. Probably kind of redundant. Back into the actual front end of Power BI now, just to talk through a few more points about the data set, how I'm bringing everything together for the end result I will be showing soon. I'm going to go to the data tab here, because when I show you kind of how step by step I'm creating my full list of complete series IDs, like as you know, CPI configurations, like as I'm bringing it in straight from the Power Query editor, really just contains that like Cartesian product of the item code and area code, but I need to bring that together with the base ID to create my full list of series IDs for CPI. So first thing I need is my base ID. So the way I'm getting that is, again, my base ID I've been storing in the CSV file I created manually. So at the highest level of CPI, I have the code along with the other high level indexes. That is actually here, again, this series ID. So I need to look up the base series ID from my CSV that I've imported to my configurations table. And so I have to create a key to do that lookup. So I'm just creating consumer price index all over consumers, right? Literally like how it is here. where is that? Right here. So that's going to create that for every record of my CPI configurations table, and then I'm going to do that lookup. So I'm going to look up value, give me that base BLS ID from my CSV, looking up by the series name I created here. And then creating my full BLS ID or series ID, you can see I have a couple conditions here. What I found is that when you're looking at the US city average, there is seasonal adjustments available at that level. However, if you're looking at a specific area for CPI, there are no seasonal adjustments. I have like one string here, one line of logic here for when I'm looking at, when the area name is US city average, do this, add in that S. When it's not US city average, when it's a specific area code, then actually add a U in there for unadjusted for seasonality. I am also creating a name for each of these configurations or BLS IDs, and I'm just sort of concatenating the descriptions that you can find in the area files and item files, these two tables here that we brought in with the web data source type, just so I have a nice sort of human readable description of what each one of these is that I can select rather than just sort of knowing what the BLS IDs are. Last bit here that I haven't really explained is I'm creating a new table in DAX, and I'm really just bringing together the configuration tables for CPI, API, both PPIs, which again do very similar steps as CPI, so I feel like I need to talk through those really data steps here as well. But just bring them all together so I have everything in one file, and therefore can sort of build visuals off the same table for all of the indexes, be able to easily compare them to each other side by side rather than having like 4 separate views. So if you want that nice, like unified, truly dynamic single view, then this is a necessary step you have to perform. And that really brings us into the filtering here. So you can see that I have some filtering available, right? So this is like kind of like my high level label for consumer price index, producer price index I have in here. I'm actually going to clear these so you can see all the options that are available, but these is just like the high level labels that I have in my series table that once again I brought in from that CSV. So if I want to just limit like my filter options to what I care about in the moment, so let's say consumer price index, then I can do that. I'll go ahead and include producer price index in there as well for commodity, just because it is nice to compare those two again for understanding inflationary variables. So, okay, so getting into BLS ID filter, just taking that completed BLS ID or series ID that I showed you how I created before, and just sort of giving the option to search exactly by that, although I don't do that a lot. And quick note here, you can see how my visuals aren't even working because if I don't have anything selected, it tries to send everything. That obviously is more than 25, so I get that error we created in the Python script. And over here you can see how it's just absolutely everything. But to get this down to just what we care about, we have some actual like more descriptive filtering options here. Area and products. This is really where that user-friendly unique value comes in with this tool that I've created here. So by series, you can drop down and just look at producer price or consumer price. I'm going to look at consumer price first. So this is area. Let's just say, for sake of demonstration, first of all, average across all. Just show you that. So that'll filter everything down to just the series up for US city average. And then let's say I wanted to look at eggs, because eggs is something that's been increasing in price a lot, as we all know. So I can do eggs, right? And then that gives me just that ID for eggs for US city average. And now it's going to run, give you my values, so my raw values over time, and then also the inflation calculation. So I got that year over year. What is the CPI this year versus last year trended out. So it's nice to have both of those just so you can kind of understand the reason for the trend, see the raw spike, and then how that relates to year over year. So let's say, okay, seeing obviously that big increase 2023, going into 2024, kind of dropping. So let's look at how that trends against, let's say something out of the PPI. So what are eggs in the PPI? So for that, there's a US city average for PPI. It's just blank actually. So if I close this CPI, And then let's see here. I'm going to actually clear this out so I can see my options for PPI. Let's do blank as well, so I have both selected. And you can kind of change the interactions of your filters to what you want. I like to leave everything sort of everything interactable and completely dynamic, but you can make it so like your bottom filters don't filter your top filter, to etc. Whatever floats your boat there. And then now I'm going to type in eggs, and I'm going to get options for both CPI and PPI. So let's do eggs, and then lots of options for eggs here. I'm honestly not sure like what's the most comparable, but I'm just going to pick one, for the sake of this. So I'll say like chicken eggs. So I got both those selected now. So you can actually see how got a couple options showing up here for chicken eggs. Let me just like select these two. And now we wait. All right, so we can see how, US to the average for eggs for CPI kind of does trend pretty similarly to the producer costs of the producer price of chicken eggs. So sometimes you'll see that the CPI kind of lags behind the PPI because you'll see costs for producers increase first typically, and then that trickles down to the price for the consumer. If you're ever unsure about what a series ID is, like for instance, we saw that I have two options here for the producer price index of commodity data for chicken eggs. You can go to the BLS website, go to Data Finder, and you can search the series ID. And if you do that, it will give you a link to a page that kind of describes what that series ID is, shows the trend over time. So I've done that for both the codes that we have in the Power BI. Both these two, differences of a trailing one at the end. And so here's the one without the trailing one. Here's the name, right? And then here's like the trend over time. So let's just say up here like 782 for Jan 2023. And then here I have it with the trailing one. So same name, right? And then if I go to like that Jan 1, it's the same value. So literally both of these codes give you the same result, and I have no idea why that is and haven't seen that in my tool yet, but always fun to find these things when you're recording a video, so there's that. And so how do these visuals really work, right? I mean, I've kind of shown all the constituent elements, but haven't really brought it all together in an explanation of this actual visual yet. So in Power BI, in the visualizations pane, in your options, you'll notice this PY here. So that's what this visual is. You can see if I select it, it's highlighted. So when you bring this visual in, it's sort of just blank, but you get this text editor at the bottom, this Python script editor. So if I select like a more typical Power BI visual, like a slicer, right, you don't have that. So that is something unique about this visual that pops up, and then you just expand it out, and you can see where you put your code. And so it gives you this description always in this visual in the text editor. It tells you like, hey, like, look, we're gonna essentially put the data that you're bringing into the visual in this data set, so this pandas data frame. So from there, it's in that tabular format you need for Power BI, and then you can just do whatever you want from there on. However, the output has to be a visualization. So that's why we have a matplotlib. That's how we're plotting out this visual, and then it will generate that in Power BI. So those are some of the conditions of this. So you'll see I do have some fields brought in here from my configuration master. So I have my ID and my name. Really the main thing is that ID. So like as I go through and select filters here, it's going to like prune that list down to just the IDs that I'm interested in. It has to be under 25, and then this code will work. It'll send a list of series IDs, of course, to the API, BLS, and bring back my results to then be processed for the visual. So it's literally the same code as I showed before in the Jupyter notebook, with the exception of a few key points, which I will call out. So scrolling through this, the real differences here is like instead of this manual entry of series that I showed in the Jupyter notebook, we have this reference to that data set, that data frame that contains a BLS ID. So really just referencing this here. So it's going to just grab that, put it on a list to be passed through the API as part of the payload. And then we get rid of that CSV step. That's not even in here. I just deleted it. And I think that's really about it. I mean, there is this label I'm creating. So that is the reason for bringing the config name. So in the legend, I'm actually showing like in words, not really actually the series ID, like what the trend is. So of course you can see here, we have US city average for eggs for CPI piece. For the PPI piece, that total is blank. That's why you have like a blank dash, but it's chicken eggs for the product. So yeah, I mean, that is really it. So hopefully, this tool will be helpful for others to just get into understanding inflation for specific areas, specific products, or just understanding CPI, PPI in general. Really, all you should have to do is, coming into this tool, which I will be providing in my GitHub, along with any other relevant materials, is your credentials. So like in here, you'll have to just put in your own stuff. You can honestly just delete this bit and then put your credentials in directly. Just put your key in, whatever that may be. That should be fine unless you're planning on sharing this out to the public like I am. So that is it. Yeah, definitely feel free to ask any questions or make any comments. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.